brethren, thank you for inviting me out to speak. I did this presentation for the Valley of Tacoma, where I am the commander of the Council of Kadash, which represents the 19th through the 30th degrees of the Scottish Rite. So if you're not already a Scottish Rite brother and you think these sorts of presentations, once I've given it, have value and have some worth, I would encourage you to go out and seek your local valley, which for most of you would be the Valley of Tacoma, but some of you may be dispersed. But please go out and seek some additional light in Freemasonry, because that's all good. So the body that I'm in charge of, the Council of Kadash, inculcates the chivalric lessons taught in the 19th through the 30th degrees. We are Masonry militant. We are here to stand up and advance the causes of equality, enlightenment, and justice. This past month has seen the continued convulsion of our nation. We shouldn't be surprised by this. The unfinished pyramid, the rough ashlar of our own nation, is refined by hammer blows. Ideally, the block is refined into the shape intended by the wielder to suit the builder's use. A strike with the gavel can result in a more perfect ashlar, or, intentionally or not, in fractures that render the stone unsuitable. This analogy is useful as a symbolical framework for our own internal ashlars. These ashlars are shaped by our own personal experiences and education, and we build up our worldview, our core values, by adopting the symbols, institutions, belief systems, ideas, and ideals that form who we are. Our task as Masons is to put these rough ashlars through a continuous process of internal scrutiny and refinement. It's only by the discomforting process of getting our own internal houses in order that we're fit to exemplify our ideals to the world without. As Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So here we are in 2020, and I found that my own core values and beliefs are being tested, and I'm sure that many of you have felt the same way. We've seen statues of some of our greatest Masonic heroes pulled from atop their pedestals, our Masonic halls vandalized and burned, and even our founding fathers are not immune to the unsparing ravages of barbarous force. It is deeply hurtful to watch what we perceive as the misplaced anger of the mob tear down symbols that mean so much to us. If only the world at large understood them, wouldn't it be a better place? When we perceive that symbols affiliated with our core values are attacked, or we see injustice perpetrated on our fellow man, it should strike at our very being as men and as Masons. Morality, equality, rectitude of conduct, justice, to render every man his just due without distinction, equal justice under the law. And I believe that to my very core. And when I see or I hear about injustice, I have a deep and visceral reaction. But we have to remember that we are all human. And as humans, we're biological creatures driven by passion, intellect, and biological processes. The amygdala is the primordial portion of our brain that sparks our fight or flight response. And studies have shown that it not only perceives physical peril as a threat, it also fires up when we see something that contravenes our core belief systems. In short, as human beings, when we see things that go against our preconceived notions, we react biologically as if they were a mortal threat. Our adrenaline surges and our heart rates increase. We have that visceral reaction to the perceived threat deep down inside of ourselves, and it impacts our abilities to perceive, to deconstruct, and to synthesize information. And critically, we lose our empathy for those who we don't recognize as sharing our value sets. And if we're not careful, we can lose the ability to perceive their humanity. Brethren, I would put it to you that 2020 has hijacked our collective amygdala. We are already stressed financially, socially, and concerned for the health of ourselves and our friends and families. So where do we go from here? Let's find instruction in the example afforded to us with the destruction of the statue of Albert Pike. So in the aftermath of pulling down the statue of Pike, illustrious brother Art de Hoyos posted several messages discussing Pike's involvement with the Confederate Army, his generalship, the circumstances surrounding the resignation of his commission, his work as an attorney fighting for treaty rights post-war, and even debunked Pike's alleged involvement with KKK. He also explicitly cited Pike's fraternal correspondence with our Prince Hall brethren, demonstrating Pike's amity with that group. He tried getting that information out into the hands of the media, but they weren't interested in it. When the story was aired, the complexity of Pike's character and his post-war legacy were nowhere to be found. He was simply a Confederate general. This is perhaps one of the most disturbing parts of the whole affair. The concept that association with something at one time in a person's life defines and taints everything else despite their future contributions and contrition, that there's no redemption, and that we're compelled to write them out of history. And in the wake of all this, there was a very eloquent response from Sovereign Grand Commander, illustrious brother Cole, that I'd like to read. And this is dated Monday, June 22nd of 2020. On June 19th, 2020, a statue of past Grand Commander Albert Pike was toppled from its pedestal in Washington, D.C. The statue celebrated Pike's humanitarian successes and his leadership of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The statue was gifted to the people of the United States in 1901. Even though the Scottish Rite no longer had any ownership rights to the sculpture, this Supreme Council has repeatedly voiced its strong support for any governmental decision to remove the statue because we recognize that its existence could be a concern among some citizens. We can never condone unlawful acts, otherwise the foundation of our society would crumble. However, the statues belong to the people since we gave it to them more than 100 years ago. Our prayer is that the removal of the statue can be at least a small step toward healing our nation's wounds. As Scottish Rite Masons, we prefer to step forward with our fellow citizens, consistent with the Scottish Rite Creed. Human progress is our cause, liberty of thought our supreme wish, freedom of conscience our mission, and the guarantee of equal rights to all people everywhere our ultimate goal. Signed, James Cole, 33rd degree, Sovereign Grand Commander. And here's what this response tells me. It tells me that our Sovereign Grand Commander is firmly in charge of his amygdala. This is an empathetic response to a complex issue, one that recognizes the perceptions and feelings of people of different perspectives. It also tells me that our fraternity is focused on its core values, the perfect ashlars of our creed, and that it takes courage and perseverance not to lose sight of them in the heat and anger of the moment. I would also note here that tearing things down is always easy. Building things up is hard, but we're builders, aren't we? So I'd like to conclude by reading a passage from Pike's Morals and Dogma. This selection is from the Apprentice chapter. I appreciate your patience as I present this because it's thick. And when Albert Pike wrote, he used a lot of semicolons, so hold on. All right, here we go. The nations are not bodies politic alone, but also souls politic. And woe to the people which, seeking the material only, forgets that it has a soul. Then we have a race petrified in dogma, which presupposes the absence of a soul and the presence only of memory and instinct, or demoralized by lucre. Such a nature can never lead civilization. Genuflection before the idol or the dollar atrophies the muscle which walks and the will which moves. Hieratic or mercantile absorption diminishes the radiance of a people, lowers its horizons by lowering its level, and deprives it of the understanding of the universal aim, at the same time human and divine, which makes the missionary nations. A free people, forgetting that it has a soul to be cared for, devotes all of its energies to material advancement. If it makes war, it is to subserve its commercial interests. The citizens copy after the state and regard wealth, pomp, and luxury as the great goods of life. Such a nation creates wealth rapidly and distributes it badly, thence the two extremes of monstrous opulence and monstrous misery, all to the enjoyment of a few, all the privation to the rest, that is to say, to the people, privilege, exception, monopoly, feudality, springing up from labor itself, a false and dangerous situation, which, making labor a blinded and chained cyclops in the mine, at the forge, in the workshop, at unventilated factories, founds public power upon private misery, and plants the greatness of the state in the suffering of the individual. It is a greatness ill constituted, in which all material elements are combined, and into which no moral element enters. If a people, like a star, has the right of eclipse, The light ought to return. The eclipse should not degenerate into night. Brethren, in closing, our nation needs us to engage and exemplify what we profess we are, to live the aspirations of our creed. It's only by discomforting and critical self-examination of our own core beliefs that will enable us to craft our rough ashlars in humble imitation of the perfect ashlars of progress, liberty, and equality. I would submit to you that that is the way that we become better men and the way that our nation keeps its soul.